Thanks, Wally. We're really excited at Minnesota Interfaith Power Line to be partnering with the Grove and East Metro Eco-Faith Network Collaborative. They've been partners for a long time. We're really excited to be partners with this and to be partnering on this event, so thanks for showing up. I want to just say a few things about our organization. We're working on two big things. So we're an organization across the state. We work with people of faith all across the state to work on climate change and from a justice and equity point of view with our faith community. We work in practical spaces, systemic spaces, and relational spaces. So we do advocacy at the legislature on policy issues, we do public utilities, we do practical implementation of programs, educational and otherwise. We help faith communities and others get solar, etc. Two big things I want to lift up just is the part of the preliminaries for tonight. One, we're working on resilient subs. The weather disruptions we're going to talk about tonight are hitting all of us all across. They're hitting folks that are low income harder, and faith communities often are already poised to help low income folks. But they're poised to be places of trust in communities. And we want to help tool up faith communities to respond in times of weather disruption and have the kind of systems and programs and operations and other things in place, the connections with emergency management personnel and others in government to be able to deploy resources and help those in need when the grid goes down, when floods happen, when heat waves hit, when droughts happen, those kind of things. So that's one thing we're working on. The other thing we're working on, especially this fall, is getting the word out about solar. You've probably heard that a bill was passed in July. It's sunsetting some of the really nice tax incentives for solar from the federal level, and those end at the end of the year. We're helping particularly commercial projects, nonprofits, small businesses, faith communities. If you put 10% down on a project in the fall, you can hold on to that 30% tax credit without building your solar system as late as the end of 2027. You're paying for 30% of your solar system. I know the Grove already has a solar system, but maybe you know a small business owner, or a nonprofit, or a faith community that could benefit from solar. You can get them into solar this fall. We also have a zero down option. So really, we can, for no cost over the life of the system, get a solar system to any of those folks. So absolutely zero cost. You can talk to me afterwards back in the back when I've got some information up there. And now, here's a few. We've done some of these zero costs. We've done actually about 18 around the Twin Cities. You can see those back in the back too. So I'll turn it over now to Sarah Wolf, my colleague, who's our strategic policy director.
Thank you so much. What a lovely evening, and it's great to see you all. Thanks, Wally and Kelly and everyone. I've been with Minnesota Interfaith Power Line for the last 3 years, working with members of our policy team and allied organizations in the climate space. And as Buff described to you, we work at a practical level and also at a policy level and a relational level. And so I've been fortunate to be able to work on things in the legislature, things in the Public Utilities Commission, and we're trying to advance our way to climate restoration, climate livability, and thrivability for all people. Throughout human existence, life of the individual has been perilous and not assured, with challenges every day. But as our societies have grown and built upon each other, we've developed systems where we take care of each other, where we do education, we provide various services that can help each other get through the perils of our lives. And when we know we can look ahead and experience now the challenges that a insurance industry itself think about extreme weather? The first, there are going to be just a couple points I'll make here, but one, they understand that severe weather is escalating insurance rates for homeowners and renters. And we have a chart here coming up next. Let's see that one. Thank you, Peter. This is probably not even very visible, but it's a chart that states where homeowners insurance was unprofitable in recent years. And we would expect that some years insurance is more profitable than others and that kind of thing. It kind of goes up and down. But we've seen some trends where in the last 5 years, Minnesota is within those top states. And so you think, we're not California, we're not Florida, but actually hail is a really big driver of insurance claims and costs, as well as other things. You know that we're experiencing hail and droughts and fires, and all of those things are pertinent here in Minnesota too. Peter. But while that can cause premiums and the costs of insurance policies to go up, it also has another possible effect. And I like this quote: "The only thing worse than unaffordable insurance is unavailable insurance." From the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Insurance Federation of Minnesota. And so this next chart is an interactive. So when risks become too great, insurers can quickly drop policy and leave markets. And so this next chart here is just a graph of this is an interactive from the New York Times, and it just shows that there are places where there's increasing dropping of policies. Thanks. The next chart. We were all eyes on California and Los Angeles when the horrible fires were happening there. There was some interesting analysis of State Farm having a sudden strategy shift that ended up dropping thousands of people from their policies. And it was in the weeks before that fire hit. And this is something that can, the next slide please too, leads us to kind of be thinking about where we are in Minnesota in this moment. How are our insurance, how is the insurance landscape for Minnesotans faring right now? Are we in a healthy spot? Are we not in a healthy spot? Do we know where we are? And one of the things that might be a narrative that would be easy to kind of buy into is that because we're having increasing extreme weather events, insurance companies are suffering, and they have to increase those rates, and they have to drop those policyholders because otherwise they can't sustain themselves. And that is a really important question to hold without answering immediately, because there is different kind of regulation in each of the 50 states we have. This is why Peter is so important here, heading this in Minnesota, because every state has a different set of regulations around insurance. And we're finding that some states are doing a better job, and some states are doing not a better job. And there are some real questions about what's happening in the insurance industry in some places. So for instance, there was, that headline was from Florida, and it was about them finding out that it looked like insurance companies were hiding their profits in various spots. Here's one about Buffett and Berkshire posting record profits on insurance and investments. And all of this is just to say, I'm not standing here with the answer, and I'm not saying something fishy is up. I'm saying it's a really important question for us to be looking at. We need to be hearing your stories about what's going on. We need to be understanding the health of the insurance landscape in Minnesota. And so one of the things we did last year is, thanks to the work of Patricia Torres-Ray here, who is my great colleague, former state senator, wonderful policy policy advocate, force that has just started meeting, that's going to be asking some questions and working together to find answers so we can understand better the health of the insurance landscape here. So that is, that's pretty much it. Yeah, that's why Minnesota Intake Power and Light is working on this, and that's why we're having this meeting here with you tonight. So thanks so much. One of the things I'm really excited about Peter saying to you all is his title, because this is a really unique position, and we're really lucky to have this in Minnesota.
Hi.
Hello.
Good evening. So wonderful to be in community with you all. I'm Peter Brickwedde. I work for the Minnesota State Department of Commerce. Before I get started on my presentation, let's be interactive for a minute. Show of hands. Does anybody know what the Commerce Department does in the state of Minnesota? Sir.
It's kind of a dual role. It's been blended. So they have separate departments of insurance, as every state does, and separate department for public utility type regulation. Again, like every state does. The only thing different is the titles of those institutions get changed from state to state.
This is great. What was your name, sir?
Richard.
Richard? You should come on tour with me. That's a much better answer than most audiences. Does anybody in the room work in insurance? Vicki, and sir, what was your name?
Daily.
Okay. Did you hold a license issued by the Commerce Department? Okay, great. Usually that's the case. For an organization that touches such a significant part of the state of Minnesota's economy, there's very little about the name of my organization that conveys who we are and what we do, and how we can be of service to Minnesotans. So that's a parlor game that I like to play when I go out and talk to people, because I have to break through that, right, to get into a conversation about who we are and what we do. A couple of other just organizational questions.
Peter, could you hold the microphone?
Oh yeah, this is scary. I don't usually get the microphone. So. Does anybody live in either a condo or a townhome association? Something that has a homeowners association. Okay, I see a lot of hands. Okay, how's life in your homeowners association? Yeah. Okay, we'll get to that. I just wanted to make sure. Who had hail a couple of days ago? Okay, all right, yeah, great. Who had somebody stop by their house? Okay. Or they called.
Five calls a day.
Yeah, only one. Okay. All right.
That was a question, not a statement.
Does anybody have a cabin or a hunting lodge or a second home elsewhere in Minnesota? Okay. And have you had trouble with your insurance on that property? Okay. Okay. I'm going to try to, if I forget one of those questions that I asked because I got excited in my presentation, remind me to come back to it. But I asked all of those questions just to get a sense of what your experiences have been, and I'd like to hear those stories. But also because they're a pretty common set of circumstances where we're seeing a lot of pressure in our insurance markets, as Sarah was talking about. So, this is us, the Commerce Department. We regulate over 40 different industries in the state of Minnesota. Our strategic priorities are there. And we are indeed the state's insurance regulator. There are 56 of us in the U.S. states and territories around the country. And these are our roles. We oversee almost every single kind of insurance that's sold in the state of Minnesota, but not in the exact same way. And we'll get into some of the differences and why that's important. Our role is also to monitor the markets and make sure they're competitive and stable. And we'll get into maybe a little bit about what that means as well. It's been a challenging decade. That's an understatement. These two questions are, I think, the ones that we get most frequently. Perhaps maybe the second one more than the first one. But the second one, in my opinion, is an extension of the first one. How competitive is our market? And the reason why I bring that up is because that competitiveness test is something that in every state, there's a definition in the law. So in Minnesota, it's in Minnesota State Statute 78, 104 subdivision 2, if you want to look it up afterwards. And it's a set of statutory tests that our staff, my colleagues, are charged with evaluating when we're looking at markets. And the presumption is that you have a competitive market if you have 5 or more insurers writing 75% of the business in a particular area. And that competitiveness test doesn't take into account, though, the affordability or the accessibility of that market for the people or businesses that are buying in that market. And it doesn't really think about whether or not people feel like they can afford it, because it's written in the law, and laws are pretty static. And what we know, and Sarah covered some of this in her presentation, is that the homeowners market in particular, which is our second largest type of property casualty insurance in the state, has had a really bad decade. I'll show you some charts that are similar to what Sarah was showing you earlier. But what we've seen in the last several years is a lot of losses. We've seen a lot of bad storms, a lot of hail, and a lot of challenges across the state. And what we're seeing in reaction is people are shopping, people are price sensitive, and they're also starting to make choices about whether or not they want to raise deductibles, if they want to change contract terms, and sometimes those things are happening without people really understanding. This is the last year, or excuse me, the last decade, the last 10 years for insurance companies. That green line in the middle is an approximation of what break-even looks like. Everything above that bar is losses, everything below is profits. You can see for the most of the last decade, until last year, it's been pretty tough. This is Sarah's chart is prettier than mine. This is the same information that Sarah was looking at. This is profit and loss, just in a bar graph form. So now, bottom of the graph is losses, above zero is profits. You can see 2024 was the best year that we had had. So, I share that with you because data is really important for us to understand what's happening. It helps us understand whether or not we have a competitive market. That's important for our regulatory responsibilities. But it's also really important for us to be able to tell the story of what's happening in the state. And it helps us also really bring information to you that can then in turn be informed by the stories of what's happening in your lives. So I can do things like this. So this is our state, right? And this is a heat map, a visualization of where all of the insurance policies are in the state. So unsurprisingly, you can see big heat maps clustered around the Twin Cities and other urban centers. I'm going to try really hard not to trip on this board. You can also see where there aren't a lot of policies, which I think is really interesting. I was here approximately in June, talking with some of my colleagues, with people who had suffered through a wildfire in a recovery event up on the Iron Range. Not a lot of policies. You wouldn't think there are a lot of people up there, but dozens and dozens of fellow Minnesotans lost homes or second homes or hunting lodges or cabins in a series of wildfires that were up in that part of the state. Up in the Bemidji area, several weeks later, a derecho. By some estimates, loss of 9 million trees, not to say nothing of the public and private property damage that was suffered in that area. And companies from 2018 through 2022. And for the first time, this data collection effort allowed us to get down to a zip code level. So this is Minnesota divided up into all of our zip codes and then overlaid with information from the census, from FEMA, and from what are called catastrophe modelers, which help the insurance industry to think about risk of going forward. And you can come up with a visualization of where our risks might be for a particular peril. I could also show you the earthquake version of this. It's not as exciting. About 12 other things. I left this slide in from the last listening session that we did, which was in St. Peter last month. For those of you who may not be familiar with the St. Peter area, I thought this was really interesting. So, this is 56082. This is where St. Peter is. It looks green because the risk is relatively low. Next door, this is one of the, by the data, riskiest zip codes in the state for hail damage. About the same number of people live in the two zip codes, about the same number of properties, about the same direct written premium, but wildly different experience. And we had a really interesting conversation in St. Peter, which, as many of you may know, if you've lived in Minnesota for a long time, had a devastating extreme weather event in 1998, which for the insurance industry was really an inflection point. There was before 1998 and after 1998. It was really interesting to talk about it with them. But we were like, well, does hail stop at the border of these two zip codes? Not usually. So I share that because the East Metro doesn't have this as clear a contrast as that did. This was really interesting. I could not tell you for sure why this looks this way, but it helps us understand why that there are some differences. So ignore the bar graph part. Look mostly at the picture. So this is East Metro. I looked it up and I wrote it down so I didn't have to memorize it. Part of it. Okay. Who lives in 55125? Okay. All right. And then who lives in 55129? Okay, great. We're like an even split. So 55125, our data splits into, down here, I just told you to ignore it. Those two columns on the left and right. The leftmost is a percentile rating for risk at the state level. So it's comparing a zip code to all the other zip codes in the state. The second column is the national percentile rank for that risk. So remember taking your kids to the doctor, and every year for their annual checkup, you get that growth curve, right? You get the percentile rank. I sat through like a 40-minute presentation for the people who put this, like did the actual original data collection, and they really got into it. And I was like, is this like when I go to the doctor and kids are short because they're in the 40th percentile? I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. 55125 is in the 30th percentile for hail risk in the state. So pretty good. That's why it's green up on the map. 78th percentile for hail risk nationally, though. So compared to all the other zip codes in the country, not an insignificant chance of having hail like a couple of days ago, right? There are about 22,000 policies in 55125 and about $50 million in written premium. So there are a lot of policies. 55129 is pretty similar. 35th percentile for hail risk in the state, 80th percentile for hail risk nationally. And that's where it makes sense if you think about it. Hail falls in a lot of places, but it doesn't fall everywhere in the country. You know, mountain ranges predominantly take up a lot of geographic area, a lot of zip codes, not a lot of hail there. So that's why even in a place relative to the other zip codes in Minnesota, you've actually got a fair amount of hail risk in the state, or compared to the rest of the country. So I live on the west side of the river, so apologies. Is there a lot of difference between 55125 and 55129 at a zip code level? Pretty similar, right? Yeah. If you look just a little bit to our southwest, towards South St. Paul, however, pretty different geography, on the other side of the river. But hail doesn't stop at the end of that zip code either, necessarily. So this is information that we can use to help think about policy solutions. It's not a means to an end in and of itself. It's about how can we understand what's happening and what do people need. And this, for the first time, is something like St. Peter was the first time I was able to do a version of this presentation with this information. So you're the second group of people who's gotten to see what I'm showing you here today. And if we think about, well, how does the state or local government, which has not infinite resources, finite resources, think about helping people avoid damage and staying healthy and safe in their homes when a storm does come through? How do you think about it? Where do you prioritize? Do you think about, this very first zip code, which isn't even actually on this map, I left it here for this demonstration purposes. Our riskiest zip code in the whole state is in Medford, Minnesota. Does anybody know where Medford is? No? Yeah, okay. It's bad luck, I think, mostly. There aren't that many people in Medford, though, in that zip code. The number of the amount of written premium is only like $23,000. So, do we want to start in a place like that, or do we want to start in a place where we have more rooms, and we may not have as much risk, but also we have more premium? These are questions for policymakers to think about. But I think it's really great to be in a place, I really hope nobody had significant damage, but when I saw there was hail in Woodbury over the weekend, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good conversation. You're experiencing right now, I think a lot of our neighbors across the state have experienced for several years. You're going through that life cycle. And we're trying to figure out how we can help people not have to have claims, to be able to reduce their risk for themselves, for their homes, and for their businesses. Because what's happening, and you'll tell me more than I'll tell you, is it's becoming a huge pocket problem. People are having trouble affording their insurance, even getting insurance in many places in the state. That's not unique to Minnesota. And it's becoming an increasingly difficult thing to be able to buy. I've also heard from lots of people that it's just something that you didn't used to think about. And now people are really thinking about it. Condo, townhome, homeowners associations. Really tough. Really tough. I mentioned earlier that as we're the state's insurance regulator, we regulate almost all of the different kinds of insurance that's sold in the state. But we do it in slightly different ways. And one of the least regulated markets in the state is the commercial market, which is where homeowners associations buy their insurance policies. So those policies, think about health insurance. Does anybody buy their own health insurance here in Minnesota? Some nods up here. So that is sold in what's called a prior approval system. You can't sell health insurance in Minnesota in the individual small group markets without us or our comprehensive health department approving that policy and that premium rate before it goes into market. Homeowners market is in what's called file and use system. So we'll look at those. Insurance companies can use it as soon as they file it with us. So we'll look at them, but it's already in the market. Commercial market is exempt from both of those. So we don't even get those filings. I couldn't even tell you with 100% certainty how many companies are even selling condo or townhome association policies. Insurance professionals in the room might be able to tell you better than I can. That's a really, really tough market. And the people who are living in homeowners associations are really exposed to the cost pressures of unexpected changes in fixed costs. You're paying homeowners associations, they're supposed to be dues that are supposed to be covering the costs income,
Mhm.
you have even less capacity to deal with those unexpected increases. Sarah mentioned earlier the task force that was convened by the legislature this year. We had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago. The second meeting is next week. Everything we've talked about here is part of that task force's purview. To be thinking about how we can make recommendations to the legislature next year to start to try to make insurance more accessible, more affordable, bring stability to our markets, and try to help people be able to stay safe and healthy in their homes. I talked, lastly, and I'm going to drink some water, and hopefully you'll have good questions and stories for us. I talked a lot about hail. As Sarah mentioned, hail is probably our most expensive peril. We have lots of other kinds of problems, like weather issues in Minnesota. We get all the weather right, but hail is the one that's the most expensive. And I think y'all are sort of experiencing that from just the quick murmurs that I heard just a few moments ago. That's something that we're going to have to figure out with. We, in 2023, passed a new law, or two new laws. One is to establish a grant program to help Minnesotans strengthen their roofs, put more hail-resistant roofs on their houses. We got some planning money from the legislature in 2023 to design that grant program. Hopefully, at a later point, we'll get funding to actually start issuing grants to Minnesota to help with that. But it's a type of roof called a fortified roof, and I'd be happy to share information about that if you're interested. That people can put on their roof on their own today. And those grant programs are structured after several successful programs that actually started in Gulf Coast states. So Alabama has the most mature program. Our program is called Strengthen Minnesota Homes. Their program is called Strengthen Alabama Homes. Do you want to guess where we got the name? In Alabama, they've done about 9,000 grants in coastal counties along the Gulf. Their primary risk is hurricanes coming right out of the Gulf. They've now got about 70,000 fortified roofs across the state of Alabama. They use that grant program to create the economic conditions and environment where people were able to get a roof if they had the means to do so on their own. It makes sense for insurers because there's a measurable reduction in the risk, the chance that you might have to pay a claim or buy a new roof on those homes. And it really works for consumers because when a hurricane comes by, or in our case, if a hailstorm comes through, chances are you're not going to have water in your house. And that's the most expensive thing that can happen, and it's also the most disruptive thing that can happen to your life if you have to displace from your home. And that's what we'd like to try to avoid. We also require, sort of in parallel, insurance companies to offer a premium discount or a rate reduction to anyone who puts a fortified roof on their home. There are approximately 5 of those roofs in Minnesota right now. So we're really starting from ground zero, right? So that's part of my work and part of the work in the department is we've been partnering with contractors, roofers, real estate professionals, insurance professionals to try to get the word out and make sure that's available. I see 2 hands. Let me come here and then I'll come here.
Yeah, real quick, what are the elements of the fortified roof? What does it look like versus normal?
Oh my gosh, okay. So I'm not a roofer. Kind of 3 kind of key elements. Here in Minnesota, one of the things that we require is class 4 or hail-resistant shingles. Because hail's our most expensive peril. That's where we're going to get the best bang for your buck from a risk reduction standpoint. Second thing is that the roof deck is sealed much higher up the roof than what the code requires. So I think in Minnesota it's like 3 feet up. This is 12 feet up. If you've ever had an ice dam in your house, like I have, I would have loved to have my roof deck sealed 12 feet up my roof, because that's where the water actually started to come in. And the third thing is how the shingles are fixed to the roof. There's a different set of standards. There's like different nails that are used, and there's a different set of standards about how many and where they go into the roof deck. And that is as technical as I can get. There's a 125-page document for roofers. I'm going to come back here. Ma'am, you had a question.
I have a quick question. Do that apply also for the HOA insurances, or are they exempt from that too?
Really good question. So there's the fortified standard, and let me do so. That roofing system was developed by an organization called the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. Y'all remember those crash test dummy commercials where cars were crashing? So that's the auto insurance safety organization. This is the building version of it. They have a research institution outside of Charlotte, just actually across the border in South Carolina. They can simulate extreme weather events. They have one of the largest wind tunnels in the nation. They can simulate the effects of a Category 3 hurricane. They also burn houses down. They do a lot of wildfire research as well. I had the privilege of being there and got to shoot a 2x4 through a brick wall out of a cannon to simulate what can happen in the event of a tornado or a hurricane. And they do a lot of hail research there as well too. They develop the standards, and so there's a version of what I'm talking about for just a roof replacement. There's also for more extensive remodels. There's a standard for building new homes. There's also a multifamily standard as well. So it kind of depends on a case-by-case basis for each association. If you're in, a 4-story building with lots of units, or do you have, 2 homes side by side, they're sharing a wall. Yeah, it would depend. It would depend on what kind of roof you have and what kind of building structure you have. But generally, the answer is yes. That was a more complicated answer than I probably needed to make it. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Sir.
On those 5 roofs that have the fortified roof, is there a known cost variation, and how does that compare to the Alabama cost variation from a normal to the fortified industrial? Anecdotally, I just changed homeowners insurance, and they asked the question if I got fortified roof, which
Oh, that's great.
yeah, I didn't know it
Oh,
was.
that's right. Yeah.
It just happened a week and a half.
Oh, that's really good to hear. I'm glad we're getting the word out.
I was not one of the 5.
Maybe it'll be 6 though. There is a delta, right, between what it would take to replace your roof and what it would take to go to a fortified roof. It's going to depend on how big your roof is, what the roof design is like, but it's usually a couple $1,000s, and that's where the grant programs have really helped. In Alabama, you can get a grant of up to $10,000. That's the maximum amount that you can get, and that's usually enough to cover that delta. I think the question sort of from a public policy standpoint is, are we buying you a whole new roof, or are we helping you afford the delta between a regular roof and a fortified roof? Your question about the difference between Minnesota and Alabama is hard to answer just because we don't have enough sample size. But what I can tell you is that earlier this year there was a study released of the effects of Hurricane Sally, which came up out of the Gulf in 2022, went over Alabama, and went over a critical mass of the fortified roofs that have been built in that state today. And there was a study done by the University of Alabama's Business School, which found that there was a really significant reduction in the amount of claims that were filed, of the claims that were filed, the claims cost, and the loss amounts. We're talking about like 50% reduction or more, which matches pretty closely what the laboratory results were for folks who promulgated and did the research. So we were really pleased to see that because it was the first real-life experience where you have an extreme weather event that's actually going over a large number of these routes, and you can really study the effects on the insurance impact. And that translates into real savings. Sarah had a slide up here earlier about what's happening in Florida. Florida's insurance market's more challenged than ours. Alabama, right next door, has been able to get to a stabilized place and isn't experiencing the kind of problems that Florida has because they've made this investment in making their homes more resilient. Protects lives, keeps people healthy and safe in their homes, but it also reduces insurance risk overall, helps insurers write coverage, sell their product at an affordable price, and stabilizes that market. State
we had Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island address us, and he was really talking about global climate change, but especially in the United States, how certain markets, so let's say Florida and California, New York, right, a lot of the coastal regions will soon be, if not already, experiencing inability to get insurance, and then the inability to get mortgages. And how is that, are you guys looking out, as far as how that's going to impact Minnesotans?
Yeah, such a good question. One of the things that I sort of like about my job, but also keeps me up a bit at night, is that we can see the future. The future looks like Florida, and to a certain extent, California. I would posit to you that Florida's insurance market is not functional.
In Cape first.
The largest insurer at the moment in Florida is the state's insurer of last resort, Citizens. They've done some things, it's improved a little bit, but it's not great. And that's what I think Senator Whitehouse, I've heard him speak many times as well too, that's what he's talking about. We could get to a place where large parts of our nation are uninsurable. And if it's uninsurable, if you can't get insurance, then you can't get a mortgage. Or you can't engage in a real estate transaction that requires you to have insurance, more precisely. And that's the future if we're not careful. Part of my job as a business unit one right now is to make sure we don't have that happen. And I think this task force that we're having is the first real serious step that public policymakers in the state, because we've been hearing from so many people around the state about the cost pressures, not just for residents, but also for small businesses and for faith communities, nonprofits of all kinds are all feeling a version of this story. If you can't get a mortgage, or you can't, you don't have insurance, and therefore you can't have a real estate transaction go through, that's a pretty systemic problem for the economy as a whole. That's what we want to prevent from happening. We want to avoid getting that far gone. Did you have a follow-up question?
Premium reduction, any information on what the insurance companies have done from premium reduction for the increase?
Yeah, we're actually doing a project right now.
Can you repeat his question?
Sure, his question, sorry, excuse me, I should be doing that from the start. His question was about, do we have any data on what the premium reduction could look like for people who put that fortified roof on their home? So we're actually doing a project right now, with the insurance industry to understand how they're calculating it for Minnesota specifically, but in Alabama, we're talking about savings of, depending on which version of fortified you're doing, anywhere from 20 to 55%. It's not insignificant. And you get a compounding effect. The more homes you have, the more risk reduction you're doing, and that helps.
Looking at some of these other states that have masks for their property insurance, Florida, California are two that come to mind. What kind of things have they done to get them? I'm asking kind of broad on this. What do we not want to do to end up like them? Can you give a broad statement of that, or is that?
Everybody hear that question? What should we not do? That's a great one. No one's ever asked me that. What should we not do? We get the what are we going to do about it question a lot more frequently. I would say a couple of things. I think we have the advantage of not having been the first big problem. So I think we can learn from the experiences. I think no state, and I would possibly probably not the federal government either, has the financial resources to insure everybody's home in the country. And so I think we want to avoid getting to a place where we are relying on the state to be your insurer. Because that not only is going to be more expensive for you in your individual capacity, but we all pay for that. And so I think both of those states that you mentioned, Florida and California, are in the position now where they have really a lot of people on their insurer of last resort. It's good to have an insurer of last resort. We have one in Minnesota, and like making sure that that's a good, viable option that provides substantive coverage for Minnesotans who need to be on it. That's a good thing. But I don't think we want people to be on it forever. I think a thing that both of those states are doing now to catch up, and because they're so much larger than Minnesota, they're sort of ahead of us now, even though they started later, is thinking about resilience. Buff talked earlier about the project that MNIPL is working on around resilience hubs. There are things that you can do at an individual level. You can do things at a community level that reduce your risk. Putting solar panels on a church helps provide a sense of resiliency, not just for the faith community and the church, but for the neighborhood as well. If there was a power outage here and the lights are still on here, people can come, they can charge their phones, put medicine in the refrigerator. Like, you can help reduce the risk to the community in a lot of different ways. And so I think those states are now accelerating significantly their investments in California wildfire risk reduction, and in Florida in the same sewers. Hurricanes are different than severe convective storms like tornadoes like we get here, but as my friends in Alabama like to say, wind is wind is wind. It blows hard and things break. So a lot of particularly the Florida example, translates to us. And I think we get other benefits because we're the first cold weather northern state to really invest, think about running a program like a strengthen insert your state's name homes program. I think there are going to be actually a lot of benefits for us if we can get that going because of things like ice dams or other winter related risks to our roofs, which also can result in water getting in your house. Yes, sir.
Are there, there's flood maps.
Yes, sir.
Are there hail maps? Insurance companies should be in a position to know granularly where the claims are.
Yeah, you'll notice I haven't said a single thing about flood so far. That's on purpose.
Flood's not in my insurance policy.
No, it's not, sir. No. Flood is sold separately. Flood is generally not covered under your homeowner's policy.
But let's look at hail.
Yeah. I'm glad you're going to get me out having to talk about flood, which is a whole other problem. This is our math, right? I moved back to it, right? Insurance companies have more data analytic capacity than we do at the state. And so they oftentimes rely on these catastrophe modelers who have really, really powerful computer systems that project forward what those risks will be like and take inputs into their models to build things that look like this. Yeah, and that hail risk, it's interesting. Hail and tornado risk is moving in the country from where we traditionally think about it. Does anybody know, like, anybody from Alabama? Just by chance, I've talked about Alabama a lot. Okay.
You can say that.
Well, I've been on a panel with my counterpart in the state of Alabama many times, and we have this great bit. It's like, if our two states can do things, like, we both, like, Alabama's not a state that I think Minnesotans really look to for policy ideas very often. Like, our bit is that we don't even agree on how to pronounce the word insurance. They say insurance, like they print it. They're wrong. We are. We're right. But, like, it's a good idea. It's a good idea. That is because in 2011, there was a really devastating tornado that went through the Tuscaloosa area. It was on the ground for almost, I think, more than an hour. Huge, deadly event. I was actually in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa in 2013, and you could just see straight where it came through town. The tornado risk, you think about, like, Wizard of Oz, Twister, that, like, tornado alley, it's moving to the east. So Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky are seeing much more tornadic activity than what we've seen in the historical record. It's because of a confluence of meteorological and climate-related issues, and some of that hail risk is moving as well.
Does that also mean that the
things happening, and this is I think what's really interesting for Minnesota about hail, is that if you talk to the folks at the state climatology office, they'll tell you we're not necessarily having more storms than we, if you look at the whole historic record. But we've built in places that 40 years ago, if there was hail, they went through a farm field, and now there are houses there. So our built environment has expanded into places that weren't getting hit with storms before. So I would posit to you that hail has become more expensive as a peril, rather than we are having more hail than we used to. Like, I'll give you two examples. We had $3 billion weather events in the Alexandria area in 2022 in one 10-day period. Most of that was hail, also some severe storms and wind. On August 11th of 2023, I was on an airplane at the airport watching a hailstorm roll in, and we took off, and it was extremely unpleasant. And then when we leveled off, the pilot came on and said, "Well, that was fun. And everybody behind us is in a ground stop because there's hail." That happy hour hailstorm, 4:30 to 5-ish on I don't remember what day of the week it was, through the metro area, $1 billion weather event. That 2023 line on my line graph, a lot of that was that 1.5 hour experience. So just have hail in the wrong place, it can be a tremendously expensive experience. Sir, you've been waiting on that. Thank you.
I assume if I got a national company for insurance, am I paying for perils elsewhere? And then to follow up, do you guys somehow control a national company from raising my premiums to cover other states?
Did everyone hear that question? So, like, both of your questions are sort of a version of the same question, right? Which is, if I'm Acme Insurance Company and I sell in all 50 states, am I trying to balance my, if I have lots of losses in Florida, am I trying to make that up by charging more in Minnesota? Conceptually, the answer is no, because insurance companies are only allowed to rate on, like, in the geographic territory in which they're selling, and they do it like by state. So the answer should be no. I would also posit to you, though, that, like, insurance companies are part of a very large economic system, right? And so I'll give you an example. We were out in Morris for our first listening session in July, and we talked to a farmer who there was one of those derechos that was in the Alexandria area came through Morris first, and he had his grain silo was picked up and deposited between his barn and another outbuilding. Big time damage. He was great. He was like, I was on my porch until I heard that. His claims experience, he told us, was really challenging. The first claims adjuster who came out to the house, like, got the claim started, could see the damage right away, had familiarity with agricultural properties, like, they got it all. Then he went to some other storm. And the next two claims adjusters that came to the house didn't have any familiarity with agricultural properties, barely spent any time in the house, and he had real problems with his insurance company. It took a fourth adjuster, who I think it used to be a farmer, I'm looking at Sarah Buck because you were there with me, but had familiarity with agricultural property, spent 2 days on his property documenting things, looking at every building, all of his crops, for that claim to kind of get unlocked and for it to be going. And I think he told us it's not completely done. Yeah, you're 3 years later. I tell you that story, sir, because that system of claims adjusters moving from storm to storm, that's a national system. So when we had the storm up in Bemidji earlier this year, we had trouble getting adjusters up to that part of the state because there were other So it doesn't necessarily have a direct impact on your rates per se, but that system is going to have an impact on your claims experience, on your materials costs for rebuilding, on your labor costs. Like it is impossible to completely separate them apart from each other. Does that make sense? Oh, I saw a lot of hands go up. Good sir. Yes. Yeah.
Don't insurance companies have reinsurance between them, and then that's another pot of money that they pull from?
Yeah. Who knows what reinsurance is? Richard, my go-to.
The insurance company for the insurance company.
It's insurance for insurance companies. Yeah. Even insurance companies have insurance. Yeah. Yeah. Most of them do.
So is that a way to say that they're taking monies away, putting it somewhere else? Is that a way?
Insurance companies have insurance for the same reason that we have insurance.
Spread of risk.
It's spreading your risk, right? It can also be used to help you expand your business, but it's what we call in the parlance it's risk transfer. And one of the things that is a driver of cost increases within the insurance system is reinsurance has gotten more expensive, particularly over the last 5 years. It's moderated some in the last 18 months, but that cost of buying their insurance has gone up, and that's passed on to policyholders. I would say the reinsurance industry, which we don't regulate at the state level and is an international system, has actually been really at the forefront of thinking about resilience and really doing it at a community scale level. So not just like you do your roof and I do my roof, but like let's look at a community that's on a river and let's figure out how we could use our insurance system and our premiums to finance building a better berm on the river to reduce the chances of there being flood risk, and then realize that savings to then in turn lower everyone's premiums. So yeah, that's definitely been one of the reasons why costs have gone up, and it's not the sole reason, but it's definitely one of them. Yeah.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, please.
This has to do with going back to HOAs for a number of people. And you said it was under the commercial certification part of it?
Yeah.
Okay, which is totally outside. Why?
Thank you.
It's a public policy choice. That is not the case in every state. It is the case in Minnesota.
Okay, is that at the legislature level or at the commerce level?
At the legislature level. Yes, sir.
And what would we have to do to change that?
That's like 4 questions. No, I'm just
Well,
yeah, it's a public policy decision. Yeah, and so I think a change in the law, having your legislators work on that is something that could be done.
Which is such a great segue because we're so appreciative of all of you coming tonight. And I think what we want to do is hear from you too. Are any of you having noticing things with HOAs? Because Patricia and I are here, Peter too, because we want to know are there things you're worried about? What are you experiencing? Have you seen XYZ things happen? And so what are you thinking about? So I'd love it, Peter, if there's anyone who's willing to say, like, this is on my mind, this is what we are experiencing. We're here to kind of also get a pulse on what's going on in communities so we can think about what we're bringing to this task force and what we're bringing to the legislature.
Is your task force in any way connected to what I believe is started in the legislature last year with part of the changes to 515B and HOAs? Because there was something that I remember hearing about where they were going to create something, I don't know, task force about to do with insurance.
Yes, so the question was, let me paraphrase, there was an effort last year, prior to the last session, to make changes to 515B, which is the statutory chapter that governs common interest communities. So yes, it's sort of like it's like a continuation with solve all the world's problems though, so this task force is continuing to look at really the insurance side of the cost impacts for people who live in those communities.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, so I'm in an HOA, really big one. We've got 230 condos in a tower, and we have 53 townhomes. So it's one association. And the word I've heard is that there's only one carrier that we can use. Is that what you're asking about, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, does that feel limiting to you?
Peter, does that meet that competitiveness
Scary.
definition?
Can we call it scary? How about
Yeah.
not just limiting, scary?
And I don't know why that is, that they can only have one. But it's important. That's helpful information. And
I mean, if you want, we can talk later, we can get into it more, but yeah, it's scary.
and why is that scary? I mean, would you just articulate that?
What's that last thing you said?
Would you, if we were to tell someone why that's scary, are you feeling like that's scary because they have the ability to increase rates at whatever degree they want? Is it because you just don't have
Yeah, it's two things.
competition?
Yeah, it's both the rate increase, and then like his first slide, unavailability possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And people say that if we can't get it's called the master insurance policy. People say if that goes away, we're all SOL.
Peter, why is there only one insurer possibility for this HOA?
Is there a good reason for this?
I can't answer it because we don't regulate that market. So as I said earlier, I couldn't tell you, Peter, if there's another one. I mean, I've heard a version of that story sadly a lot. I heard one, I heard maybe two. We've heard from a lot of associations that are actually getting their master policy now what's called the surplus market. So think of like Lloyd's of London, which is
That's reinsurance.
well, they do Lloyd's does reinsurance, but they also sell specialized kind of one-off insurance policies. But they tend to be significantly more expensive, and they're completely unregulated. Like even less so than the admitted market, the condo market now. And so that's really challenging. That poses its own set of challenges.
There's excuse me, but there's something that we're using something called insurance market. I think it's called. Have you heard that name?
Peter, will you say a little bit more about it?
Well, I think the name on the master policy is insurance market. Does that sound familiar?
No.
Or insurance warehouse. Maybe that's it.
Oh, okay.
Insurance
Yes.
warehouse. Does that sound?
Yes. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, Dana. Well, you had your hand up first. I'll go after
Yeah,
Richard.
I'd like to support you. What you're saying is you want to hear feedback of what we are experiencing. And I'm going to suggest that all of us in this room are not in the same situation. It would be best if you answered with your own experience what you're seeing and say, I live in a single family house. I live in a 53-unit condominium tower. I live in a homeowners association with rules that I have to insure my house on an HO3 type policy, and the condominium or the HOA is responsible for exterior damage, roof, siding. My policy as an individual does not pay that, okay? That type of HOA is going to have hail, wind, fire, perils. But if you're in an HOA that has monuments that are basically masonry, they're only at the beginning of the platted area, and at most they have a swimming pool, something like that. What is their exposure? is liability, not property. If someone drowned in the pool, you're a member, and it was your fault for not having a lifeguard. That's liability. So you don't need to take this gentleman's exposures and apply it to a single-family dwelling, and vice versa. So if you are in a HOA, what kind? What is their exposure? And you record that separately so that when you get to the legislature, it's not confusing.
Right. Thank you.
Richard, I'd add to it as well. Like, if you live in a condo or townhome, do you have your own insurance coverage that might have some protection for those assessment increases, and to what amount? And I think that point of sort of understanding your own coverage is something that, you know, having an insurance professional who you can ask those questions of, not just when you're having a problem, but before something happens, is also a really, really good thing for everybody to be able to do. And you can have that kind of specialized conversation about your specific example.
So my worry is very general, and it has to do with what happens after these hail events, where people get, you know, insurance companies coming up and offering to redo your roof, and it's easy for people to say, sure, if it's free. But I worry about all the refuse that's coming off of these roofs that are getting replaced time after time. What a lot of pollution that's adding to the landscape.
Can I speak to that from a personal experience? I'll just give an example. I live in a single family house. I've been with Allstate since I was 16, got my license for a car, and then I got a home on with Allstate Home Insurance. In 2013, there was a big hailstorm, and we had, you know, I must have had 10 roofers come to the house and say, we should inspect your roof, blah, blah, blah. We're like,
Our neighbors got
we
damaged.
don't want to replace our roof just because some, you know, fly-by-night place says that we ought to. And then after about the 10th, and when we saw about 5 neighbors getting their roof replaced, we called our agent. We said, what's going on? Should we be getting our roof replaced? And he told us, yeah, you better make the claim and get it repaired.
I had the same.
Because if you don't, then later they may say, well, you didn't get it fixed after that hailstorm, we're not covering it in the future. So we did. We got a new roof in 2013. I get up on my roof regularly because it's real easy to do, and I clean it off. And I was up there, you know, with about a 3-month period between when I hadn't been up there, and I was like, what is going on with my roof? It's like all torn up. We had a hailstorm in May. I didn't realize it, but it had damaged the roof. I made the same claim that I did in 2013. I got a adjuster that would not even get up on my roof. She asked the roofer, who was already up on the roof, hey, could you just airdrop me the photos that you're taking? She didn't. She seemed like she had just been trained like maybe the week before. I mean, she had no concept. It was a completely different experience in 2013. This was just 2 months ago. And they just kind of categorically just said, absolutely no, we're not repairing the roof. We're not doing the roof. And it's worse off than it's so bad that I could tell the damage. Whereas in 2013, I was like, well, where's the damage? I don't see any damage.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
You were talking also about the sort of the pollution, the sort of the life cycle of that roofing material.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a metal roof on their house? Everybody have shingles on their house? The fortified roof concept, technology agnostic. You can have a metal roof, you can have shingles, you can have solar panels on it. It's more about that water intrusion prevention ultimately, and the hail prevention. But I bring up the metal roof specifically because when hail hits metal, it does, yeah, like your car if it gets hit in a hailstorm. But what's the reason you have a roof on your home?
Right, to protect the inside.
Right. talked with a lot of people who have metal roofs who are like, it looks like expletive, right? But it's still working properly. And insurance isn't going to cover a claim on a cosmetic issue. So there's lots of inputs into that question. But I mean, we live in a state and in a country where the predominant roofing material is still shingles, and I can't solve that today.
And maybe someone should get in the business of making, divoted or rippled metal.
Like a business
Yeah, that idea.
Well, they already had metal shingles that looked like a shaped roof.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't be able to tell
There you go.
that it's with a dent. Different types of metal have different capacity for damage prevention.
Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of a carryover from him. My question is there any certification for these people coming around and asking, do you need a new roof? Because frankly, I think I think they're just.
I'd like to, I don't want to interrupt your statement, but I'd like you to address that as a Minnesota licensed contractor and a non-resident contractor when you answer that question.
So the question was about licensing or certification requirements.
So you're dealing with a reputable organization.
So contractors are required to be licensed to do business in the state. Roofers as well. There are a community of people in that business who follow storms across state lines. I think it's a really, really good thing for people to ask questions about their license. Certainly before you sign anything with anybody, to then get that license number and check it out on our colleagues at the Department of Labor and Industries licensing website, which you can go and look up. Sorry? Yeah, I think I have heard many stories from Minnesotans over the last several years about having sort of quickly signed paperwork, or might sign up with the company that my neighbors were using, or they signed it, so I should sign, and sort of aggressive sales tactics, and then all of a sudden, a couple weeks later, there's a problem. And that is real. And so I do think, and it sounds like several people in the room have had this experience in the last couple of days, where after a storm, particularly if there's hail, there's people coming through the neighborhood knocking on doors and saying, oh yeah, we can fix this for you, or we can get you something, or I'd be very cautious as a consumer about those types of solicitations, and I certainly encourage you to get information and to verify it at the Department of Labor and Industries website or on the phone with them before you sign any paperwork.
And while you're talking about it, if they ever say that they'll cover the deductible and you won't have to pay it, that's your first strike against it. Don't do any business with it. That's fraud.
I have a question on the flip side. There was a thing called the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided a lot of grants back. Was Commerce finally given money and the authority to dispense those? I know we built a house a couple of years ago, actually a year and a half ago, and there was supposed to be grants for Energy Star certification or net zero ready certification. Whatever happened to those, and how do we work the other side of the equation that says, instead of just resilience of what we've got, and what we're dealing with will get worse and worse and worse as the weather gets, as the climate gets worse. How about making it better, having better buildings?
Oh, Joe, such a good segue. I think I would prefer to maybe follow up with you about the federal government's funding or not funding those programs maybe after I'm not being recorded.
Is this a comment?
Yeah, but what I will say, Joe, is like, things that exclude homes from eligibility for some of these programs. So like we have a program with the Department of Commerce called Healthy Air Program, which takes vermiculite out of people's homes. Vermiculite is one of the primary things that makes a home ineligible for weatherization services. We have enough funding to do about 8 homes a year. Vermiculite also gives people cancer. So like it was started as a program to help get more homes weatherized. From my perspective, it's a program that helps people not get cancer, keeps you healthy. And so I bring all that up because one of the things we've really been thinking a lot about is like how can we, instead of having 5 or 6 different state agencies, have like a whole bunch of different programs that you have to figure out how to get to individually. Like how could we come to your home and do a lot of projects at once, inside and outside, to help on all of those things, to help you be more energy efficient, reduce your consumption, and also.
So it's called an energy audit, and they do a blower test, and they measure your.
Yeah, they do all of that, right?
Per hour.
And then like, but you've got to then do all the follow-up. Like, how can we make that a better experience for consumers?
So I see a couple more hands, and I don't want to cut out your question, Eric or Peter. Maybe we can go with Eric's question, and then I'd love it if, Eric and Jim, and then Patricia is going to have a couple of minutes to say something.
Okay.
But then you can stay
Yeah.
for a little bit longer,
I'll hang out.
and we can too. So Eric.
Yeah, mine's not a question, just to follow up on your request for experiences and worry. I saw my both auto and home owner's insurance. I live in a single family home, limited HOA, very limited HOA. I saw them increasing over time. If you did have an insurance broker, never heard from them. That's what it is. But my experience was, because of those costs, I became a little more active on my own as a consumer and found that there were some fairly helpful tools to shop the residential market. Just compare.com, and it's called something Zebra, thezebra.com. And I cut my rates, auto insurance to like 30% and homeowners like 60%. Same coverages, in some cases better coverage. I guess I share it because there is a role in the consumer in the cost side. But I was worried just like everyone else. I just wasn't worried about it. But the good news was, there was a belief that at least that's my experience in a single family home.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And Jim?
I have a question on how adjusters work, how they're credentialed. I'm a single family owner on a household, and just share one experience. Recently, 2022, we had hail damage. The insurance company sent out an adjuster, looked at the roof, and says, it's not even borderline, I wouldn't file. So I called the agent that sold the insurance. She said, I wouldn't put in a claim. We had a relative that had a contractor. He climbed on the roof. He says, you not only need a new roof, he says, you need new siding. So he went to the company, got pre-approved. I got a new roof on the siding.
introduction, I didn't get to introduce myself, but I served in the Minnesota Senate for 16 years, represented District 63, but now I live near you. I live in Oakdale. I just moved a couple months ago, so I'm very happy to be in this community. I do policy and legislative work with Interfaith Power and Light with Sarah, and I just want to thank you and tell you a little bit about what we need to do next. You asked a question about why is that we are not regulating housing associations. Why is that we don't have this? Why? I'm going to tell you why. Because the people who lobby at the legislature really represent the industries. That's one of the biggest problems we have in legislatures, not just in Minnesota, but across the country. You don't pay lobbyists. They do. And they pay very well to regulate, on behalf of the industry. In Interfaith Power and Light, we're trying to change that, and we're trying to be the advocates for you. But ultimately, what Eric said is exactly right. We have to advocate for ourselves. If you are not actively involved in asking these questions, nothing is going to happen. And I want to say thank you to Peter and to a very responsible administration that when we say to them, we're doing these hearings around the state, and we want you to come along, they said, absolutely we will, because we also want to hear from consumers. We want to hear from people. This administration is really responsible, and they want to hear, and he's going to go back with this message. But that's a separate, they cannot be advocates for you. That's a separate responsibility. Peter cannot go back to his commissioner and say, hey, we need to make sure, that these associations actually have, an advocate at the Capitol and advocate for this problem. He can bring their concern, but they cannot advocate. And you're absolutely correct, Richard. It would be fantastic if we could actually map out the district and we could say, oh, this is your problem in this group. That's your problem in this group, and that's your problem in this group. Well, that takes a tremendous amount of resource. The Department of Commerce should do that and say, really where we have the greatest problems is when we have housing associations of 300 people and they don't have a choice. They have, who represents them. So we are inviting you to really be more actively engaged and involved in this process. Eric is doing his homework by saying, okay, I'm going to go try to find a better price for my situation. I understand my situation. I'm going to find a company that works for me. That is becoming more and more limited action that you can take. Pretty soon, there's not going to be a lot of options for you that we can afford, that you can afford. So please contact us. Contact the administration. Contact the Department of Commerce and say, hey, I have this problem, and I want you to document that problem. I want you to know that I'm facing this with my housing association, and I want to know who's speaking for me. And do that with Bob, who is constantly visiting all of us, all of these congregations, and talk to us. We're going to be advocating at the Capitol, and we're going to need you. If you don't talk to your senator, so let me ask the question. Do you know who your senator is? Could I have a show of hands?
Not right now.
You don't have a senator right now. Well, soon you will, and you would know. You have excellent representation. Please contact your new senator and your representatives and let them know of your problems. This is a huge issue. We're going to be advocating for you, on your behalf. We don't work for anybody but for you. And please make sure you contact our organization and get involved in the work that we do with community outreach. So I just wanted to say thank you and make sure that you know the difference between calling the Department of Commerce and calling Interfaith Power and Light to advocate with us on your behalf.